The soil beneath my boots has known my family's footsteps for 3 generations. This was never just farmland. It was our legacy written in furrows and fence posts. My grandfather arrived here with nothing but calloused hands and unwavering determination. He worked this land until his fingers bled, until his back curved like the horizon at dusk. Every rock pulled from these fields bore witness to his sacrifice. Every tree planted marked another year of survival. I remember him teaching me to read the land like others read books. "The color of morning dew tells you what the afternoon holds," he would say, cupping a handful of earth close to his nose. "This soil remembers every promise we make to it." When I inherited the farm after his passing, the responsibility settled on my shoulders like an ancient mantle. 200 acres of productive farmland, corn swaying in summer breezes, cattle grazing on rolling pastures, the natural creek winding through like a silver ribbon tying it all together. Silver Creek, they called it, the water that gave life to everything I grew. The first sign of trouble came with bulldozers. Not on my property, but close enough that birds abandoned their nests near my eastern fence line. The trees began to fall in neat rows, like soldiers surrendering to progress. Yellow machines carved wounds into the earth where wildflowers once bloomed. Economic development, the town newsletter called it. Silver Creek Heights, luxury living in harmony with nature. I nearly choked on my coffee reading those words. I noticed changes immediately. My irrigation pond, always brimming even in dry seasons, began receding at its edges. The creek that once rushed with clear mountain water slowed to a trickle. Wildlife patterns shifted, deer abandoned ancient paths, and frogs fell silent at night. Something was disrupting the natural order that had sustained this valley for centuries. My first calls to the mayor's office were met with practiced courtesy. "We understand your concerns, Mr. Hayward. The development is fully compliant with all environmental regulations. Perhaps the drought is affecting your water table." There had been no drought. They knew it. I knew it. I drove past the construction site daily, watching as mansions rose from raw earth like alien structures. Concrete foundations poured over soil that should have absorbed rainfall. Pipes installed where water once flowed freely. Each luxury home listed at starting prices my grandfather could not have earned in 3 lifetimes of honest work. Mayor Charlotte Wilson appeared in local papers, cutting ribbons and shaking hands with investors in tailored suits. Her smile gleamed with ambition and secrets. The same woman who had eaten at my family's table during campaign season now avoided my calls. Her assistants became gatekeepers, her schedule perpetually full. One evening, I stood at my property line watching workers install massive drainage systems. Their machines hummed late into the night, headlights illuminating what looked like redirection channels. When I approached with questions, security guards emerged from trailers, explaining that this was private property and I needed to leave immediately. Something was deeply wrong. The natural watershed that had sustained this valley for centuries was being rerouted, redirected, and controlled, not for the common good, but for the perfect green lawns of Silver Creek Heights. My land, once nourished by natural water flows, was being deliberately dried out. That night, as I watched lights glowing from the construction site, I felt something shift inside me. Not just anger, though there was plenty of that, but resolution. Whatever they were doing, I would uncover it. Whatever they had taken, I would reclaim. The land my family had bled for would not die quietly at the hands of greed and political favors. My grandfather once told me that land and truth share one quality: they cannot remain buried forever. Both find ways to surface when least expected. I did not yet know how right he would be. The discovery came at dawn. I had taken to walking my property boundaries each morning, documenting changes with my old digital camera. The habit started as therapy, a way to process my growing anxiety about the farm's future. But that Wednesday morning, it became something more. I followed the sound of machinery humming where no machinery should be. Behind a thick stand of oak trees that marked my northwestern boundary, I found them, 3 excavators and a team of workers in yellow vests installing massive PVC piping. They had diverted Silver Creek completely, rerouting the water that had flowed naturally through my property for centuries. I stepped out from the tree line, camera already recording. "Excuse me, what exactly is happening here?" The foreman approached, hard hat gleaming in the early light. "Routine maintenance work, sir. Nothing to worry about." "Maintenance on a natural creek that has never needed human intervention before." I kept the camera steady. "Who authorized this work?" He produced a laminated document with official-looking stamps. "All approved by the County Water Board. We are just making sure the flow remains stable for both the agricultural zone and the new residential area." The document looked legitimate to my untrained eyes, but the timing felt suspicious. I noted the company name emblazoned on their equipment. Westlake Contracting, owned by the mayor's brother-in-law if local gossip was accurate. "Do you mind if I take pictures of that authorization?" I asked. He suddenly needed to make a phone call and walked away. The workers resumed their tasks, avoiding eye contact. I spent the next 3 days documenting everything: the creek's former path, the new piping system, the rapidly dropping water levels in my irrigation pond. I time-stamped each photo, creating a visual record of what was happening. The images told a story that words alone could not convey: systematic water theft disguised as progress. Within a week, my main irrigation pond had shrunk to half its normal size. The fertile soil near the creek banks began cracking under the sun, desperate for moisture that no longer came. Crops that had thrived for generations now struggled, leaves curling in silent protest. My horses gathered at empty troughs, confused by the change in routine. Chickens pecked listlessly at parched ground. I began hauling water from town in plastic containers, an expense I could not sustain and an indignity that burned deep in my chest. Neighbors noticed, but most stayed silent. Many had sold portions of their land to the developers, pocketing quick money and moving to smaller properties. Those who remained feared challenging the powerful interests behind Silver Creek Heights. The development promised increased property values and modern amenities: swimming pools, tennis courts, and artificial lakes that somehow remained full while natural water sources disappeared. "Just bad luck with the water table," one neighbor suggested when I raised concerns. "Nothing to do with the development." His eyes shifted away as he spoke, both of us knowing he was lying to himself as much as to me. I decided to confront the situation directly. The town hall meeting was scheduled for the first Tuesday of the month. I arrived early, camera in hand, prepared to speak during the public comment period. Mayor Wilson presided with practiced charm, her expertly tailored suit and perfect posture projecting authority and control. When my name was called, I approached the microphone with photographs and water-level records. "For the past month, Silver Creek has been systematically diverted away from agricultural lands to serve the new development," I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "These photos show unauthorized modifications to natural waterways that have sustained local farms for generations." The mayor's smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened. "Mr. Hayward, while we appreciate your concern for the environment, I must remind you that Silver Creek Heights has passed all required environmental impact studies. The modifications you reference are approved improvements to prevent flooding and ensure water management for all residents." "All residents?" I challenged. "My farm has lost 60% of its irrigation capacity since construction began. That is not management, it is theft." Whispers rippled through the audience. The mayor leaned into her microphone. "These are serious accusations, Mr. Hayward, and completely unfounded. Perhaps your irrigation system needs modernization. The county offers grants for agricultural water efficiency upgrades." Laughter scattered through the audience. Someone muttered, "Upgrade from what? The Stone Age?" I felt heat rise in my face. "My system worked perfectly until your brother-in-law's company rerouted the creek." The gavel came down hard. "That is quite enough, Mr. Hayward. We will not entertain baseless personal attacks in this forum. Your time is up." Security stepped forward, making it clear my moment at the microphone had ended. As I returned to my seat, I noticed a few sympathetic glances but mostly averted eyes. The public humiliation was calculated, a message that challenging power would only result in embarrassment. That evening, I stood alone by my drying barn, the camera heavy in my hands. The setting sun painted everything in gold and shadow, including the dying corn stalks that should have stood tall and green. 3 generations of my family had overcome drought, pests, and economic hardship, but never betrayal from those elected to serve the community. I pointed my camera toward the setting sun, capturing the fading light on my struggling land. That same light would be reflecting off the artificial lakes and decorative fountains of Silver Creek Heights. Something had to give. Someone had to speak truth to power. I decided then that someone would be me. Legal action seemed the obvious next step. If the system was broken, surely the courts could fix it. I withdrew savings meant for a new tractor and hired Alan Merritt, a local attorney with environmental law experience. His office smelled of old books and coffee, walls lined with framed diplomas that promised competence. "They have violated riparian rights laws," Alan explained after reviewing my evidence. "Water that naturally flows through your property cannot be diverted without proper compensation and environmental review. We have grounds for an injunction." Hope flickered like a pilot light, small but persistent. We filed the paperwork on a Tuesday. By Friday, the counterattack began. The sheriff delivered the first notice, a lawsuit claiming my property violated 17 separate county code regulations. The second came by certified mail, allegations that my outdated farming practices constituted environmental hazards. The third arrived with county inspectors who appeared unannounced, measuring distances between structures, photographing equipment, and citing obscure ordinances I had never heard of. "Your grain silo is 3 feet closer to the property line than regulation allows," one inspector noted, writing furiously on his clipboard. "That silo has stood in the same spot for 38 years, I protested. "Grandfathered exemptions expired with the new county master plan," he replied without looking up. "You will need to relocate it or face daily fines." The legal assault was coordinated and relentless. Every motion Allen filed was met with 3 counter-motions from the mayor's legal team. Every inspection triggered another. Paperwork multiplied like weeds after rain. Each envelope that arrived carried new threats, new requirements, new expenses. Allen tried to remain optimistic. "They are trying to bury us in paperwork. That suggests they know we have a legitimate case." What we did not have was the financial resources for a prolonged fight. My legal bills mounted with sickening speed. 5,000 became 10,000, then 20. I sold my backup tractor first, then the antique truck my father had restored. The cattle went next, 16 head of prime Angus that represented years of careful breeding. My wife Sarah watched the dismantling of our life with quiet desperation. "James, we cannot keep doing this," she finally said one night, voice breaking. "We are losing everything." My brother Thomas, who had moved to the city years ago, called with unwanted advice. "Cut your losses," he urged. "Sell the land while it still has value. These people will crush you." "This is not just land," I argued. "This is our heritage." "Heritage does not pay bills," he countered. "Do not be a fool." Perhaps I was a fool. The preliminary hearing went exactly as the mayor's team had planned. The judge, a golf partner of the lead developer, though we could not prove it mattered, denied our request for an emergency injunction. "The court finds insufficient evidence of immediate environmental harm," he intoned, barely looking up from the bench. "Furthermore, the plaintiff's property appears to be in violation of multiple county ordinances, raising questions about standing." The final blow came 2 days later. A court order demanding I cease all farming operations pending resolution of the code violations. My farm, productive for 3 generations, was suddenly deemed too dangerous to operate. I stood in the middle of my dying cornfield that evening, holding the court document as the sun set. The paper trembled in my hands, though whether from rage or despair I could not tell. Around me, the land seemed to be holding its breath. No birdsong, no cricket chirps, just the distant sound of construction equipment still working through dusk at Silver Creek Heights. Standing there, surrounded by the withering remains of my year's work, something shifted within me. Not surrender, I had given too much to surrender. Something colder, something more patient. If they wanted to talk about environmental impact, perhaps it was time to let nature have the final word. I folded the court order carefully and placed it in my pocket. The mayor and her wealthy friends had studied law and money and power. But I had studied this land for 47 years. I knew something they did not, something no environmental impact study or luxury brochure could capture. I knew what happened when water remembered its true path. Nature speaks in patterns to those willing to listen. My grandfather taught me that the first heavy rain after a dry spell always reveals the truth about land, where water wants to go versus where humans have forced it to travel. Silver Creek had not earned its name through gentle babbling. It had earned it through the fierce silver torrents that came with seasonal storms. When the Weather Service announced a major system approaching our county, I felt a strange calm settle over me. 3 days of heavy rain predicted, possibly the heaviest rainfall in 5 years. The timing could not have been more perfect or more terrible, depending on which side of the creek you stood. I began my preparations quietly, not interfering, the court had forbidden that, but observing, documenting, understanding. I walked my property line each evening, noting how the newly installed drainage systems had altered natural contours. Where water had once spread gently across absorption fields, it now channeled into narrow concrete culverts. Where it had once slowed through wetland areas, it now raced through slick PVC pipelines. Most importantly, I documented how all these systems directed overflow toward my property, away from the precious homes of Silver Creek Heights. I needed verification that my observations were correct, professional confirmation that would stand up to scrutiny. Through a farming forum, I connected with Robert Jennings, a retired civil engineer who had worked for the county water department for 30 years before disagreements with the current administration led to his early retirement. Robert arrived driving a modest pickup truck, wearing mud-stained boots and carrying equipment that looked well used but professional. We walked the boundaries together in silence at first, his experienced eyes taking in what mine had already seen. "They have created a hydrological nightmare," he finally said, shaking his head. "These systems are designed for average rainfall, not major events, and they have eliminated all the natural overflow areas." "Is it legal?" I asked. He knelt to examine a culvert entrance. "Technically, they have permits, but what they submitted for approval and what they actually built appear to be different animals entirely. These pipes are undersized. These grades are too steep." He stood, wiping mud from his hands. "And they have designed everything to shed water away from their precious development and toward my farm," I finished. "Exactly. Your land is now their designated floodplain, whether you agreed to it or not." Robert helped me document everything properly: flow calculations, capacity limitations, engineering flaws. We created maps showing how water would move during a major rain event. The evidence was clear. Silver Creek Heights had been built to stay dry at my expense, but during a major storm, the system would fail catastrophically. As dark clouds gathered on the western horizon, I made my own preparations. Not sabotage. I would not give them that satisfaction, but protection. I installed small berms around my remaining structures. I moved equipment to higher ground. I set up rain gauges and marked water levels. Most importantly, I prepared my cameras, weatherproof, time-stamped, and positioned to capture what was coming. The first drops fell on a Thursday afternoon. By evening, the gentle rhythm had become a steady percussion on my roof. Through the night, the intensity grew. I sat on my porch, watching lightning illuminate the landscape in stark flashes, revealing sheets of water already beginning to flow in new patterns. Morning brought no respite. The storm had settled in, determined and relentless. I donned my raincoat and boots and began my rounds, filming everything. Silver Creek, once diverted to a trickle, now strained against its artificial constraints. The fancy drainage systems of Silver Creek Heights, designed for aesthetics rather than function, began to show their weaknesses. Water has memory. It remembers the paths it carved over centuries. No amount of engineering can completely erase that memory. As the rain continued into the second day, water began reclaiming ancient routes through now-paved streambeds, across manicured lawns, around concrete foundations never meant to withstand such forces. I stood at my property line, rain pelting my hooded figure, and watched as nature delivered the verdict no court had been willing to provide. By the second day, puddles became ponds. By the third morning, ponds became lakes. I documented everything methodically, moving from vantage point to vantage point despite the relentless downpour. My cameras captured what words alone could never convey, justice delivered by raindrops. Silver Creek Heights transformed before my lens. The artificial lake, designed as a scenic centerpiece for the development, overflowed its decorative banks. Water ignored the neat boundaries of luxury properties. It poured into underground parking garages where residents had stored second and third vehicles. It seeped into basements filled with expensive furniture and wine collections. The drainage systems, overtaxed and undersized, surrendered completely. Manhole covers became fountains. Street gutters became whitewater rapids. The elegant entrance gate stood half submerged, its security keypad shorting out in bursts of electrical protest. I filmed a Mercedes floating gently out of a driveway, carried by currents toward the main road. I captured the moment when the retaining wall behind 4 mansions gave way, sending muddy water cascading through French doors and floor-to-ceiling windows. I documented residents wading through thigh-deep water, designer clothes soaked, expressions stunned as they carried waterlogged possessions to higher ground. They saw me, of course, standing on slightly elevated ground, camera in hand. Their expressions shifted from shock to anger. I became their target, easier to blame than faceless nature or their own poor choices. The HOA president, a retired banking executive named Richard Harmon, splashed toward me through the flood. "You did this," he shouted, pointing a manicured finger now grimy with mud. "You sabotaged the drainage systems." I kept filming. "I have not touched any drainage system. The court order prevented me from farming, not from documenting what happens when you steal a creek." Others gathered behind him, a waterlogged mob seeking someone to blame. "He blocked the culverts," someone shouted. "He diverted the water toward our homes." I stood my ground. Every action I have taken is documented, every rainfall measurement recorded, every water flow tracked. Would you like to see the engineering assessment of your drainage systems, or the original water flow patterns that existed before you buried them under concrete? Their accusations continued, but uncertainty had crept in. Some began filming me with their phones, perhaps seeking evidence of wrongdoing, but capturing only a farmer standing in the rain, documenting truth. The confrontation might have escalated if emergency vehicles had not arrived, sirens cutting through the downpour. Rescue teams in bright yellow gear began evacuating residents from the worst-hit areas. The HOA leadership was diverted to crisis management. I was momentarily forgotten. That evening, I downloaded my footage and began organizing it chronologically. The story it told was devastating in its clarity. Every failed drainage point, every overwhelmed system, every redirected flow now returning to its natural path. Most importantly, it showed how water that should have been absorbing slowly across my fields had been channeled directly into the development by their own design. I uploaded selected clips to social media. "Silver Creek reclaims its path," I titled the first video. I included Robert's engineering assessments, the original watershed maps, and documentation of how the development had altered natural drainage patterns. The response was immediate. By midnight, local news stations were sharing the footage. By morning, state environmental agencies were calling. The videos spread from local groups to regional news sites to national environmental forums. The images were too powerful to ignore. Million-dollar homes partially submerged while their owners waded through muddy water in designer rain boots. Mayor Wilson called an emergency press conference from the temporary shelter at the high school gymnasium. I watched her on my laptop, looking less polished than usual, her trademark composure showing cracks. "This was an unprecedented weather event that no system could have fully prepared for," she insisted, voice tight with strain. "We will investigate all aspects of the drainage infrastructure and make necessary improvements." A reporter interrupted. "Mayor Wilson, We have received engineering analyses suggesting the Silver Creek Heights development significantly altered natural watershed patterns. Was an adequate environmental impact study conducted before construction? The mayor's smile faltered. All required studies were completed and approved by relevant authorities, including the water diversion that dried out neighboring farms. Another reporter pressed. I am not prepared to address specific technical questions at this time, she responded. Our focus is on resident safety and recovery efforts. But the questions continued, each more pointed than the last. The narrative had shifted. The luxury development was no longer the crown jewel of progress, but a case study in environmental mismanagement. By the fourth day, as rain finally subsided and waters began to recede, residents of Silver Creek Heights were no longer directing their anger at me. Their questions now targeted their own HOA board, the developers who had promised them paradise, and the mayor who had assured them of its perfection. I stood on my porch that evening, watching the sunset break through clouds for the first time in days. My land had absorbed what water it could. Fields that had been dying of thirst now gleamed with moisture. The natural wetlands at my property's edge, though damaged by the development's alterations, had performed exactly as nature intended, slowing water, filtering it, allowing it to seep gradually into the aquifer. My phone rang constantly, journalists, environmental groups, attorneys offering representation. I spoke with some, ignored others. This was no longer just my fight. The water had made it everyone's concern. As darkness fell, I walked to what remained of Silver Creek's natural bank on my property. The water level had fallen, but the creek still ran stronger than it had in months. I knelt and let my hand trail in the current. The truth always surfaces, my grandfather used to say. Sometimes it just needs a little rain to help it along. The investigations began formally the following week. State environmental protection officials arrived in white SUVs. EPA representatives followed. Journalists continued calling. Throughout it all, I simply provided my documentation, methodical, chronological, irrefutable. Robert Jennings proved invaluable, explaining in clear terms how natural watershed patterns had been violated. His testimony carried the weight of decades of expertise and institutional knowledge. What we witnessed was not merely a storm, he explained to investigators. It was the predictable result of ignoring hydrological realities in favor of development aesthetics. The development company issued statements distancing themselves from the drainage designs. The engineering firm claimed they had submitted proper plans that were later altered. The county officials who had approved everything suddenly discovered procedural irregularities in the permitting process. Through it all, Mayor Wilson maintained her public composure, though the strain showed in her tightened smile and defensive posture. "We will conduct a thorough review and make things right," became her mantra in public appearances. Then came the leaked emails. I never discovered who released them. Perhaps someone in the mayor's office seeking immunity, or a developer covering their legal exposure. The messages documented years of coordination between Mayor Wilson and the development company. They revealed how environmental concerns had been systematically minimized, how impact studies had been narrowly scoped to avoid detecting problems, and how water rights had been deliberately misrepresented. Most damning was an exchange regarding my farm specifically. Hayward property presents obstacles to optimal drainage solutions. Owner unlikely to sell at market rates. Recommend proceeding with alternative Plan B to redirect watershed. Property devaluation will follow naturally, creating future acquisition opportunity. The fallout was immediate. Mayor Wilson canceled 3 scheduled appearances. The city council called an emergency session. Protesters gathered outside town hall with signs reading "Water is life" and "Justice for farmers." When Mayor Wilson finally emerged to address the public, her statement was brief. She announced her resignation effective immediately, citing health concerns and family priorities. She expressed confidence that full investigation will reveal that all actions taken were in the best interest of the community's growth. She took no questions. The luxury homeowners of Silver Creek Heights, once the mayor's staunchest supporters, now led the charge against her. Class action lawsuits were filed against the development company, the town, and the mayor personally. Residents who had paid millions for paradise now owned water-damaged properties with plummeting values and structural questions. The town council, recognizing the need for dramatic action, invited me to address a special session focused on environmental remediation. I stood at the same podium where I had been humiliated months earlier, but the atmosphere could not have been more different. Water will always find its true path, I began. What we build must work with nature, not against it. This community has the opportunity to become a model for responsible development, one that respects natural systems while still allowing for growth. I presented a simple plan: restore the natural watershed, remove the artificial diversions, create proper buffer zones between developed areas and agricultural lands, establish conservation easements to protect critical absorption fields and wetlands. The interim mayor, a retired schoolteacher who had frequently questioned development priorities, nodded throughout my presentation. The vote that followed was unanimous, a complete reversal of the previous administration's priorities. Within weeks, crews began removing the illegal water diversions. The natural flow of Silver Creek was restored, with improved monitoring systems installed to track water levels and quality. My irrigation pond began to refill. Fields that had been withering began showing signs of recovery. The court orders against my farm were vacated. The violations mysteriously resolved. The legal attacks ceased as suddenly as they had begun. I received no formal apology, but I required none. The land's revival was vindication enough. One evening, as I walked the recovering wetlands at my property's edge, a black SUV pulled up to my fence line. Richard Harmon, the HOA president, stepped out, looking uncomfortable in casual clothing instead of his usual business attire. "Mr. Hayward," he called, approaching the fence, "do you have a moment?" I waited as he crossed the muddy ground, his expensive shoes clearly not designed for farm visits. "I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. "Many of us do. We bought into a vision without questioning its foundation. We believed what we were told about environmental protections." I nodded but remained silent, letting him find his words. "Our homes will take months to repair. Some may never be the same." He looked across my fields where green was slowly returning. "But we have learned something valuable about this land, about respecting what was here before us." "Land remembers," I said simply. "Water remembers." "Yes," he extended his hand across the fence. "We are establishing a watershed conservation fund. The HOA voted unanimously to support restoration efforts. We would value your input if you are willing." I considered his outstretched hand, the same hand that had pointed accusations at me during the flood. Then I thought of my grandfather, who believed in second chances almost as much as he believed in the land itself. I shook Richard's hand, feeling neither triumph nor resentment, only the quiet satisfaction of truth finally acknowledged. The queen had fallen, but the kingdom remained. My role now was to help rebuild it properly. Recovery comes slowly to wounded land. The spring following the flood brought tentative green shoots in fields that had nearly died. Summer saw the return of crops, not as abundant as before, but growing stronger with each rainfall. By fall, my reduced herd of cattle grazed on recovering pastures. The natural rhythm of the farm began reasserting itself, like a heartbeat returning after trauma. I was not alone in the restoration work. Community volunteers appeared on weekends, some from town, others from Silver Creek Heights itself. They helped replant native buffer vegetation along the creek banks. They assisted with irrigation repairs. They learned the names of native plants and the purposes of wetland ecosystems. The northern section of my property, 10 acres that had been particularly damaged by water diversion, became a community agricultural project. We established raised beds, teaching areas, and demonstration plots for sustainable farming practices. Children who had never seen vegetables growing now planted their own pumpkins and tracked their progress with weekly visits. Local schools organized field trips to learn about watershed management and agricultural heritage. college students conducted research on natural flood mitigation strategies. What had been nearly destroyed was transforming into something new, a living classroom where theory met practice. News crews returned for a different story. From Conflict to Collaboration, the feature was titled. They filmed me walking the land with Robert Jennings and Richard Harmon, all of us pointing out restoration progress and future plans. "Would you say justice was served?" the reporter asked me. I considered the question carefully. Justice suggests punishment for wrongdoing. What happened here was more like correction. The land asserted its truth. Our job now is to listen more carefully. The cameras captured images of Silver Creek running clear and strong again. They filmed children from town planting native seedlings along its banks. They recorded the gradual rebirth of what had nearly been lost to greed and short-sightedness. Former Mayor Wilson relocated to another state, avoiding both media attention and ongoing legal proceedings. The development company settled most lawsuits quietly, restructured under a different name, and adopted new environmental standards in their marketing materials. The system that had enabled the tragedy remained imperfect, but more eyes were watching now, more questions being asked. One crisp autumn morning, I visited my grandfather's grave in the small cemetery on the western edge of my property. Wind rustled through nearby oak trees, the same trees he had planted as a young man, now tall and strong. I cleared fallen leaves from his simple headstone and sat beside it, watching sunrise illuminate my recovering fields. "You were right about the land," I said quietly. "It remembers, it speaks, it corrects." The morning breeze seemed to strengthen briefly, as though in response. I had lost much in the fight. Equipment sold, savings depleted, years of productivity sacrificed. My brother still thought I had been foolish to resist selling. Some neighbors still avoided eye contact, uncomfortable with their own silence during the conflict. Sarah still worried about our financial future, though she never questioned the necessity of our stand. Yet sitting there, watching gold light spread across fields that had nearly died but now lived again, I felt wealthy beyond measure. The land beneath me contained my family's story in every handful of soil. The recovering creek carried their songs in its current. The returning birdsong echoed their laughter. When I finally stood to leave, I placed my hand briefly on my grandfather's headstone. "The roots held," I told him, "just like you said they would." Walking back toward the farmhouse, I passed volunteer saplings already sprouting along the restored creek banks. New life emerging from conflict and chaos. Nature finding balance again. My phone rang, Richard Harmon calling about the watershed committee meeting that afternoon. Silver Creek Heights was implementing new rainwater collection systems and wanted my input on integration with natural drainage patterns. The collaboration would have seemed impossible a year earlier. I paused at the crest of the hill that overlooked both my farm and the development beyond. Morning light caught the creek water, making it shine silver against the landscape, the feature that had given this valley its name long before luxury homes or property disputes existed. Water remembers its true path. People can learn to remember too. Some lessons come gently, through stories passed down through generations. Others arrive with thunder and flood, demanding attention. But the truth eventually surfaces, carried on currents both seen and unseen. I continued toward home, boots crushing fallen leaves, creating temporary impressions that would soon disappear. The land would outlast all our human dramas. The water would continue flowing long after our conflicts were forgotten. But for now, in this moment, I had the privilege of standing as witness to recovery and renewal. My grandfather had entrusted me with more than land. He had entrusted me with its story. Now that story had a new chapter, one of resistance, redemption, and restoration. The roots had held, they always would.